Story 1. My son had been asked to be the ref in a hockey game. His first time, so as a proud mom, I hung around. This was house league. In other words, less than 1 out of millionth of a chance any would make the NHL. This was a Christmas tournament, so the teams would play several games each. During the game, the home team had a very obvious beginner skater. He skated towards one of the corners and put up both his hands to use against the wall to stop himself. Unfortunately, he was hanging on to his stick with both hands, and there was another player between him and the boards. It was a light hit, and the player most certainly was not injured. The rules of the game were that any hit from behind, accidental or otherwise, resulted in a 5-minute penalty and a game misconduct. The skater felt horrible but understood the rules. Cue the entitled parent. One of the parents started chanting "the reffing sucks" over and over. Other parents joined her. After this went on for about a minute, I happened to catch her eye and asked how the reffing sucked, and her brilliant reply was "the reffing sucks." I then asked what she would want, seeing as the maximum penalty was already given, and her response was that the reffing sucks. I finally told her that the ref, it was only a 14-year-old boy, was my son, and she finally sat down. In the next period, another beginner skater from their team simply lost his footing and fell. A player from the opposite team was close, but in no way had interfered. The boy stayed on the ice, and my son skated over, called for the team's trainer to come, and waited. Cue entitled parent again. This time she literally stood on the boards hung over the glass and looked at my son and said, "You're not going to call that?" My son then conferred with the linesman who had been closest and had actually seen that the kid fell on his own. My son did not address the entitled parent and instead skated over to the bench, talked to the coach, and explained what the linesman had seen. My son was watching the puck near the goal at the time and hadn't seen it. I was so proud. He then skated to the correct face-off, blew his whistle, and the game started again. The game ended up tied, and because it was a tournament game, there was a shootout to determine the winner, and wouldn't you know it, but the entitled parent's son scored the winning goal. She looked in my direction and then said, "That's my son. He's going to be in the NHL." She then looked and faced me and said, "That's my son. He's going to be in the NHL." I ignored this, but when the third time came, and she absolutely was nearly in my face saying it, I replied, "Cool, maybe my son will be the ref." She completely lost it and started swearing. Several of the parents from the home team reported the antics to the person in charge of reffing, and she called me to collaborate the story, and then asked to speak to my son to ensure that he was okay in dealing with that type of abuse. The karma, the entire group of parents were banned from attending any more of their children's games. Side note, when I asked my son how he was doing, having been verbally abused, he told me he barely heard it as he was focused on the game. I took him for ice cream. Story 2. So this is a small restaurant owned by an old Korean man, who we'll call Simon, who doesn't really care about it and dumps the responsibilities on the 2 general managers. They're not actual general managers, as they both have the same authority level. They both have been working there for about 4 or 5 years, so there has not been a new full-time manager since. One of the managers is a guy we'll call Levy, who's really chill and usually handles the majority of the responsibilities. The second one is a super lazy, trashy, and witchy manager who we'll call Sandra. Both of them serve and manage at the same time. I work as a host, and servers have to start as a host and climb their way up. I work with a fellow host who I brought in, who needed a job, that we'll call Jasmine. For context, Sandra has many times tried to make not only me, but my other coworkers do her job for her. This has resulted in some of my former coworkers quitting, and some actually complying to get it done. One day, we were super packed, and it's first come first serve, so our waiting list was backed up to 30-45 minutes. Add the to-goes to that, and the fact that we had only 2 hosts, Jasmine and I. It was hell. Jasmine was doing to-goes, and I was handing the floor chart. In the middle of this, the servers were all out of ranch and cocktail sauce. Sauces are a manager duty at the end of every night. Servers are only supposed to help them when they're done with their closing duties. Sandra never ever does it and leaves the servers to do it for her, since she knows if she leaves it undone, somebody will have to do it. A server stops her and tells her they're all out of sauces. She goes, "Oh, that's fine. You go do sauces." I was super busy as the lobby was packed, so I turned around and asked, "You mean get the ones from the back?" She chortled and went, "No, as in get the cups and actually make them." The hosts were only busy enough and we only have 2 hosts max. I told her, "That's not my job." She then got into full defensive mode and tried to push it on me because the host station wasn't clean. It is now, since you're not going to clean the host station. The host station is shared by the servers as well to throw trash, run food, and help customers who pay out and request things. I completely ignored her and went on helping the customers around me. Another time, Jasmine was scheduled in the morning, so she comes into the restaurant with no one present except the head cook. She went on and did her host duties anyway, until about 45 minutes later, Sandra and her cousin, who is a server, showed up. Seeing that not everything was done, Sandra got mad and blew up on Jasmine, who was fairly new at the time. She asked her why she didn't do the managers' and servers' opening duties as well, since they weren't there. Jasmine, who was baffled since she was new and didn't even know what their duties were, goes, "I don't even know what your opening duties are. It's not my fault you're late. I just did what my opening duties were." This is just the tip of the iceberg. There are so many other things. One significant one is that she never busses and moves her tables back since we have no boosters. The servers have to do it themselves. She knows that if it's busy and she doesn't clean them, the host will have to do it for her so she can get sat. This means cleaning up even 15 tops with trash all over the ground. Eventually, I had enough of her nonsense, so I texted the owner that I will be quitting. I thanked him for the opportunity, then began snitching her out about all the nonsense she's done while he is away, in hopes of him doing something about it. Simon only came in to order shipments and checks. Never cared to know what was really going on. Found out he just forwarded my text to her and did nothing. She always bragged about how Simon needed her and could never get rid of her, so it was disappointing to see it come true. Until a week afterwards, I got a text from an old coworker, who quit that place as well, that attached a screenshot of Levy asking her for a favor. He asked if she could hook him up with a job immediately if he needed one, because the business was going downhill. Within 2 weeks of me quitting, Simon got into a car accident which resulted in him being hospitalized for 3 months. Sandra's cousin's boyfriend, who also worked there, got fired for stealing money from other workers, Levy and Simon. Sandra's boyfriend, who usually helped around the restaurant, passed away. I was super shocked upon hearing this, but at this point it wasn't my business anymore. I received a text from Sandra's cousin saying I had a check lying around and told me to come pick it up. I was suspicious, but hey, who can say no to free money? I went to go pick it up to find out that Sandra was no longer manager and got demoted to a server again after 5 years. I guess finally, after seeing that these things all went down while Sandra was in management, he finally did something about it. Meanwhile, a good friend of mine there got promoted to a manager. She walked in and didn't even look at me. It was so satisfying to see her having to ask the new manager if he could put in the discount code for her. After losing that power to someone who she used to take advantage of and make fun of during her managing years. Karma is a witch. Story 3. Hospitality isn't known for its amazing personalities, but no one could take the cake of a boss and his wife that I worked for about a decade ago. They took over a beautiful pub restaurant in a mountain range that the locals loved to visit. It would have taken almost no effort at all to have a very successful business, as there was no real competition, and the area was very affluent. On weekends there was always a queue of customers. Unfortunately for all the staff and the locals mentioned, the owners were on a massive ego trip, having moved from the city to set up this restaurant as a way to settle down, which they clearly were not capable of in the slightest. The wife boss will now be known as Karen. They were so highly strung that the hairs would stand up on the back of your neck when they came into the building. I learned to expect that every word that came out of their mouths to be either barking orders or criticizing even the most petty of details. I kid you not. Karen yelled at me once because I hadn't turned all the coffee cups' handles so that they were pointing in the same direction. I started working there part-time and managed to put up with their antics much better than the countless other part-timers that came and went. For one, I was content to just do whatever they told me, as deep down I knew it would come back to bite them in the end. Being their longest staff member, after just 4 months, I kid you not, I got the best pick of shifts. Also, by being one of the only fully trained members of staff, I never really worked directly with them, as I would cover the shifts on their days off. Every day, they seemed to be getting more and more stressed and micromanaged to the point they decided to just install cameras everywhere, so they could sit at home and monitor the staff. I would get calls multiple times an hour telling me things like one of the tables needed to be cleared, the customers had barely left, or that I was standing and talking to a local too long and should be sweeping or something. Unfortunately, this kind of corporate McDonald's-style ethos didn't really work when the majority of your customers were regulars who wanted a coffee, a meal, and a 10-minute chat with a friendly face. One thing they were really hung up on was the till. Such was their paranoia about the till that only the bosses, myself and one other girl, Jessica, could operate it no matter what or how busy we were, which of course led to multiple situations of inconvenience. Also, we had to count out the till several times a day and deposit the money in the safe, even if we had only made $20. After a particularly busy day, I was closing and had received new instructions just that day from Karen that from now on, we would keep all big denominations, $50 or more QI roll, hidden under the main compartment of the till. From the moment she said it, I knew it was another nitpicky rule that she'd forget about straight away. So of course, what else should I do but follow orders? The next morning, when I finally checked my phone around 10 a.m., I saw that I had 10 missed calls from work and also worryingly from Jessica, the other staff member who I got on with really well. I called Jessica first to hear her tell me that Karen had come in and counted the till, and when she couldn't find $50, accused Jessica of stealing it and fired her on the spot. No, I'm not joking. Jessica had called me from the car park to say goodbye, and while I immediately knew what happened and told her about it, as well as saying sorry to her, we were both glad she didn't have to work in that nightmare place anymore. I was angry that the owners had treated Jessica like that. I knew they were crazy, but to fire someone accusing them of stealing was a new low. However, I did get great satisfaction from calling them and putting on my best facade of nonplussness. The conversation went like this. Karen, I've just had to fire Jessica as she was caught stealing. The till is missing $50. I still couldn't believe that they didn't ask me first, as I was the last one to actually count the money the night before. Why did they even think it was Jessica and not me? They were completely nuts. Me, in my best malicious compliance voice. Oh, that's weird. I definitely counted it correctly and put all the money, just as you told me, with the $50 notes in the bottom compartment, as you explained just yesterday. I'm not going to lie, the following pause brought me great glee as I could practically hear the buzzing in Karen's head, as she opened the till and found the missing $50 note right where it should be. Having just fired the second longest staff member they had, me still being the first, meant they had to work all of Jessica's shifts before we could hire and train another, saying goodbye to all their time off for weeks. Also, I made sure to tell our regular customers, who took the time to get to know the staff by name, what had happened when they asked where lovely Jessica had gone. Many stopped coming in unless it was my shift, having seen the real personalities of the bosses, and they tipped the staff more too. I stayed there for a short while longer and was happy to hear that Jessica had found a job in a much nicer cafe soon after leaving. I left after I had saved up money to go traveling and found out that the restaurant closed just a few weeks later. I don't think they even lasted a year total. Whatever they did next, I do hope it didn't involve employing anyone else, as they definitely do not have the personalities to manage staff. Story 4. I'm a 19-year-old college student who suffers from post-traumatic stress disorder due to a home invasion incident 3 years ago. I was alone at home when 3 armed men broke in, and while I managed to hide and survive, the experience left deep emotional scars. My therapist recommended a service dog to help me cope with the anxiety and panic attacks that followed. That's how I got my little guardian angel, a 7-pound Chihuahua who might be tiny, but is absolutely incredible at her job. She can sense my anxiety spikes before I'm even aware of them and helps ground me during panic attacks. She's been through extensive training and certification, and despite her small size, she's as professional as any larger service dog. Yesterday, I went to Walmart with my dad to pick up some clothes. Everything was going fine until we reached the arts and crafts aisle. I was browsing through some items when a young girl, probably around 5 or 6, approached us. She immediately started baby talking to my dog. I politely asked her not to distract the dog, explaining that she was working. The girl completely ignored my request and kept trying to reach for my dog. My dad, seeing my discomfort, stepped in and asked the girl where her parents were. When she pointed to the next aisle, my dad walked her over to her parents. We thought that would be the end of it, but boy, were we wrong. Not even 10 seconds later, the girl came running back with her mother, crying as if someone had just stolen her favorite toy. I felt my anxiety starting to spike as the mother stormed toward us. My dog immediately sensed my distress and curled up against me, her way of telling me to remove myself from the situation. I had to sit down as I started shaking, and my dad positioned himself between me and the approaching woman. My dad politely greeted her and asked if he could help. The woman immediately started complaining about us not letting her daughter pet the dog. I tried to explain from where I was sitting that this was a service dog who couldn't be distracted from her work. The woman scoffed and said I looked perfectly fine, as if she could somehow diagnose my condition just by looking at me. My dad, getting visibly frustrated, told her it was none of her business and asked her to have a nice day. The little girl started whining about wanting to pet the cute doggy, which only seemed to fuel her mother's entitled behavior. The woman then had the audacity to accuse us of animal abuse, claiming we were making the poor dog wear heavy stuff, and that they were trying to save it from us heartless people. She was referring to my dog's standard service dog harness with its patches, something that has never caused my dog any discomfort. Seeing that reasoning with this woman was pointless, my dad and I decided to walk away. That's when things got really scary. This woman actually chased after us. She shoved me hard enough to knock me down and tried to grab my dog's harness. My dad, thank goodness, was quick to react and managed to keep my dog safe, while telling the woman he was calling the police. I was completely breaking down at this point, crying uncontrollably as this woman continued screaming accusations about dog abuse. Several other shoppers noticed the commotion and came to help. One older gentleman stood between us and the woman, while a kind elderly lady sat with me and tried to help me calm down. The police arrived within minutes since the station was nearby. Store security had already detained the woman, and several witnesses immediately came forward to give their statements. I was still too shaken to speak much, but my dad handled everything. The woman was arrested for assault, and we later found out she was also charged with attempting to interfere with a service animal, which, apparently, is a serious offense. The store manager was incredibly apologetic and provided all the security footage to the police. What really touched me was how the community rallied around us. One of the witnesses turned out to be a retired service dog trainer, and she gave a detailed statement to the police about how well-behaved and properly equipped my dog was. The store's security team was amazing too. They've permanently banned the woman from all local branches. The woman ended up facing multiple charges, and I later learned through the police that this wasn't her first incident of assault. She had a history of similar confrontational behavior at other stores. Last I heard, she's facing serious legal consequences, and the judge wasn't too pleased about her attempting to interfere with a service animal. My dog, as always, was a complete professional throughout the entire incident. Once we got home, she got extra treats and cuddles for being such a good girl. I'm just grateful for my dad's quick thinking and all the kind strangers who stepped up to help us. Story 5. I had decided to go back to university. I had divorced and the business I worked in closed down. I was looking to improve my qualifications. I decided to get cheap rent at the university dorms and share accommodation there. Though I was 9-10 years older than the kids there, I was well liked and got on with everyone, and it was nice there. There was one guy there, though, that everyone nicknamed Crazy Dave. Crazy Dave was genuinely psychologically imbalanced. I use that specific terminology because he was medicated and often used to stop taking his pills and go from a little weird to nasty and aggressive. He was in my dorm in the living space. We had a communal lounge room space and a kitchen, and then our one bedrooms coming off that. He was the other end to mine. We had a couple of friends from one of the other dorms over one night, and for some reason, Dave suddenly started boasting about his martial arts training. We kind of acknowledged what he said and tried to steer away from this. It had nothing to do with what was being said, and it was of no interest to any of us. For some reason, I do not know then or now, he started to talk badly about me and how he could beat me. There was not a person there who either cared or frankly who would have doubted this. Dave was around 6 foot, and whilst not a ball of muscle, was a big guy. Me? I was 5 foot 9 inches and about 70-75 kgs. He was emboldened by our refusal to engage or dispute this. So it started. It became obsessive with him, and he became more and more confronting and nasty. I tried ignoring it. I was not a kid, and I was not going to allow him to make me feel bullied. I also acknowledged that he had issues. When it kept escalating, I tried being firm with him, telling him it was not cool and I was not interested in fighting him, and did not care if he believed he was better at fighting or could beat me or any of that. It did not matter. Finally, it all came to a head after 2 weeks. It was just me and him home. I was making a sandwich in the kitchen. He was sitting in the lounge. He started goading me. "Shut up, Dave. I do not have time for this nonsense today." He started to get up and walk over, threatening me as he came over. The bench I was making the sandwich on connected to one of the walls, and so him coming into that space meant he was in between me and the rest of the house, essentially blocking me in with a wall on one side and him on the other. "You better sit down, Dave. Do not come closer." Closer he came, all the while telling me what he could do to me. I kept him in my periphery and, without looking at him, grabbed him by the throat and pushed him hard towards the counter. The counter was up to my stomach, but given his height, his bum hit the counter, his feet lifted, and he fell backwards, suddenly and unexpectedly, across the kitchen bench and further to his alarm. His head was off the counter in free air. He struggled to get up off the counter and stop going off the edge, but was already partially off and had me pushing on the other end. I was bloody lucky he did not land on his head when he fell. I was enraged and leaped over the counter on top of him, where his size worked completely against him. I made sure I did not hit him in the face. I grappled and rained blows down on him. It did not take long. When he stopped resisting, I too stopped. It was more about giving him a message, making him feel helpless and vulnerable. He was bug-eyed and raced to the phone telling me he was going to call the police. I told him to go ahead. He called the police and explained what happened, and they asked his address. Dave couldn't remember, and I calmly called it out to him, which he confirmed over the phone. The police obviously asked who I was, and after being told I was the one who had fought with him, they hung up. I thought that was the end of it, but then he went to the administration. They called me in, and on sitting down the guy said, "I suppose you know why you are here." I said, "No." "Dave in your dorm said you had an altercation." I asked which Dave. There were 2, coincidentally. He said the name of the Dave. I stared blankly at him. He said you both were fighting, more blank stares, physically. I tried to sound incredulous. With Crazy Dave? That guy is huge. He would murder me. His hands are the size of my head. Is he taking his meds? Well, I will take it that you weren't, but something has upset him, and he has decided he is moving out and back to the city to study. Are you able to avoid him in the meantime? I told him I would be more than happy to. I gladly did so. Whenever he saw me, He would retreat into his room, and I stayed out of his way and tried to make it as least awkward. I never rubbed it in or shared it. I hope Dave gets on in life, and I do not wish him anything bad, but I hope that he never tries that nonsense with anyone else. Story 6. Okay, so about a year ago, I left a job working as a waitress at a salad buffet place that shall remain nameless. I had been working there for about 2 years. More on my departure later. When I started working there, I was warned by a friend of mine who had gotten me the job to watch out for the night shift manager. Let's call her Nancy. Nancy was a massive jerk. Not only was she grating just in her personality, but she had the worst temper and would go off on anyone for minor infractions or just not doing things her way, which more often than not was the exact wrong way to be doing these things. I occasionally worked as a cook on the hot bar, making hot food items for the buffet as well. In the first 2 months of me working there, Nancy told me no less than 10 times, probably more, to make a sheet cake for the bar, was informed by me that I had never been trained on how to make sheet cake, and instead of showing me so, I would know for the future she would just scream for the customers to hear, "You are so useless. Move, I'll make it myself." So yes, Nancy was a total witch, and quickly developed a hatred for me because I am not the kind of person who keeps my mouth shut when I'm being unjustly berated. At least 3 times, the owner of the place, let's call her Dolores, she'll be important later, had to reprimand Nancy because I told her how Nancy had been treating me. And each time she got reprimanded, her ire for me grew, and she would, after a short period of acting like a decent person until the heat died down, start laying into me even harder. Of course, this wasn't even the worst of it. I've worked with jerk managers before. I know how to handle myself. What really tipped the scales for me was her supplemental income practices. You see, Nancy wasn't just a witch. She was a greedy witch. She had worked as a waitress before she became manager, as I understand, and apparently missed the tips, because she would keep a hawk-eye out for regular customers who tipped well and would insist that she serve them, no matter whose section they were in. That was majorly against company policy, as was the fact that when she didn't have any of these high-dollar parties to sponge off of under the table, she went over the table instead, right to the tips left for other servers. I cannot tell you how many times I watched a party put down $5 on the table, walked away to put dishes down, and then walked back to find Nancy bussing my table. Just trying to be helpful, she would say, and be informed, "Sorry, looks like they stiffed you. Better luck on the next table." God, she wasn't even subtle about it. Every table she bussed for me would up, stiffing me. And of course Nancy would flaunt into work each day, bragging about how she just got her hair done at the salon or got her nails done. Makes me sick. But I digress. You see, I wasn't sitting idle all this time. I had, as I mentioned, told Dolores about her harassment of me, but I also informed her about the theft of tips and taking tables she wasn't allowed to take. Dolores, let's get this straight right now, had no business on this green earth owning or trying to run a company. As I understand it, it had been a dream of hers to run a restaurant, and her entirely too loaded for his own good hubby had paid for the entire thing just so she could. She clearly grew up as a rich witch and was used to things just going her way, because a decent manager she was not. But more on her later. The reason I bring up her ineptitude is because when I told her about Nancy's unacceptable and illegal behavior, Dolores would just shrug and say, "Yeah, a lot of the servers tell me that, but I can't really do anything without proof. I'm trying to find someone to replace her as night manager, but until I find someone, we're just stuck with her." Eventually, though, Nancy did get the sack. I don't recall exactly what she was fired for. It's not important. What is important is when Dolores called me into her office one day. "Hey, Shiloh, so Nancy is trying to file for unemployment benefits. Could you write a statement of the things you saw her doing around here so I can show that to unemployment and I don't have to pay her?" With abject glee, I had a statement detailing some 30 infractions, many illegal, that I had witnessed Nancy engaging in printed out and ready to hand over to Dolores the next morning. As I hear it, not only were her benefits denied, but she was also being questioned by the police. Score. But Dolores doesn't get off scot-free either. As I said, she had no business running a company. She was a horrid little monster. Rich and entitled, neither by her own earning, she strutted around like the queen of the place. I remember once she was asked about Christmas bonuses, and she said, "Oh, I'm sorry. We just don't have the money to give anyone a bonus this year." The next day, she went on a vacation to Cancun or somewhere like that and came back after doing some expensive cosmetic surgeries. No money, yeah right. I was entirely sick of Dolores for reasons that I won't enumerate, seeing as I seem to have a novelette forming already. I do try to keep these short. They just keep getting away from me. I was ready to quit and find a new job. However, my landlord informed me that he was selling the house I was renting a room in, and I had to find a new place to stay. So these things aligned made me start thinking. My girlfriend and I, who lived out of state, were always planning on moving in together. She had an empty bedroom. I had money to rent a car. I needed out of my job. We pulled the trigger. I booked a car for 2 weeks out, typed up my resignation, and gave Dolores my 2 weeks' notice, which is a far sight more professionalism than she deserved from me after the nonsense she had put me through. So my last 2 weeks at this job, Dolores saw fit to try and punish me for daring to leave her employ. She was having staffing issues at the time because she was developing a reputation as a bad boss, so very few new applicants were coming in. Those who already worked there were jumping ship because Dolores was a nightmare, and they could already feel the ship was starting to capsize. So for my last 2 weeks, Dolores would happily schedule me as the only server on many shifts. I would have the entire floor of roughly 60 tables I would have to tend to. Luckily, it was a buffet, so catering to a table was quick and easy, and I'm a great server, so I could handle the workload. Joke's on her. I made more in those last 2 weeks than I usually made in 2 months working that job. She also decided not to schedule me for any days off in that time, though the lengths of the shifts made overtime very improbable. But no matter. Like I said, I'm a great waitress. Partially because I don't just do serving. I have my fingers in a little bit of everything, trying to make sure the entire place runs smoothly, not just the parts I'm responsible for. Teamwork makes the dream work. The thing about that is, I don't think Dolores ever realized just how much I did for her on a daily basis. At least, I hope she wouldn't be stupid enough to treat someone who was keeping her livelihood afloat the way she treated me. But who knows? The point is, as I was looking over my schedule, I noticed that Dolores has me scheduled on the day I'm supposed to leave. The day that falls outside my 2 weeks' notice. Guess not being able to count to 14 was one of the things contributing to her poor management. And lo and behold, she scheduled me to work solo that night. I'm 5 hours outside the town border when my shift starts. Right on cue, my phone starts ringing off the hook. I let it go to voicemail the first 3 times, then picked up the 4th. Me, hello? Dolores, Shiloh, where the hell are you? Your shift started 15 minutes ago. I need you here right now. Oh, did you schedule me today? I thought I told you 2 weeks ago I was quitting. That's tomorrow, not today, panic creeping into her voice. Nope. Count it up. I handed you my 2 weeks' notice on date X, and yesterday was day 14. Okay, I messed up. I just need you to come in tonight. I have nobody else who can cover. Sorry, Dolores, I'm already in another state. It would take 5 hours to drive back, and my shift would be over by then. You'll have to call someone else to come in. I already tried when you didn't answer your phone. None of them want to come in, that figured. I wasn't the only one who wanted as little to do with Dolores as possible. Well, I guess you'll have to figure something out. You're the manager. I'm sure you'll manage. And with that I hung up, turned off my ringer, and had an absolutely blissful drive out of my old life, comfortable in the knowledge that Dolores was full on, 5 alarm, hair on fire, panicking in my wake.